I found my fiancé in bed with my sister 3 days before our wedding. Instead of screaming, I snapped a photo and sent it to the family group chat. Then I checked into a cheap motel and opened my laptop. It was Tuesday. 3 days before my wedding, I left the office early to drop off centerpieces at the new house in Evanston. I'd paid 80% of the down payment on that property, a decade of savings poured into a place I thought would be our future. The house was silent when I unlocked the front door, but a trail of clothing led up the stairs. I recognized the charcoal fabric immediately. That was Trent's bespoke suit. Bought specifically for our rehearsal dinner. Further up lay a pile of seafoam green silk. A vintage dyer dress. I knew who it belonged to because I'd lent my younger sister Brittany the money to buy it last month. I walked up the remaining stairs without a sound. My heart wasn't pounding. My mind was already shifting into the analytical gear I used at work. I reached the master bedroom and pushed the door open. There they were. Trent, my fiancé of 2 years, and Brittany, my 30-year-old sister, the golden child of our family. They were tangled together in the bed I paid for. Most brides would scream, throw vases, or demand answers. I did none of those things. The part of my brain that dismantles white-collar criminals took over. I took a step back, pulled my phone from my pocket, framed the shot to capture both their faces, and snapped a high-resolution photo. The camera shutter clicked, a sharp sound echoing in the hallway. Trent's head snapped up. His eyes widened in absolute terror as he scrambled to pull the duvet over his chest. Brittany let out a pathetic gasp. I did not wait for excuses. I turned around and walked away. I didn't even look back. I walked down the stairs with the same steady pace I used when walking out of a boardroom after exposing a $1 million fraud. My heels clicked on the hardwood. Each step a deliberate beat. I could hear Trent's panicked voice shouting my name, stumbling over furniture. But I didn't stop. I reached the front door, stepped outside into the cool Tuesday afternoon, and pulled it shut behind me. The lock clicked. I stood on the porch for exactly 2 seconds, listening to the muffled sounds of chaos inside. Then I got into my car, shut the door, and sat in the driver's seat. My pulse was calm. My mind was crystal clear. I turned the ignition, and the engine hummed to life. I didn't drive away immediately. I needed to act before the shock wore off and they started calling. I pulled out my phone, opened the family group chat, the one my mother had created 2 months ago to coordinate the wedding weekend. 20 members, my parents. My brother David. His husband Jamal. 3 aunts. 2 uncles. 4 cousins. My grandmother. And of course, Brittany. They had been using this chat all week to argue about seating arrangements and debate whether the cocktail hour should feature oysters or shrimp. Now I was about to give them something far more memorable. I opened the photo I had just taken. The high-resolution image of Trent and Brittany in my bed. Frozen in that moment of guilt and terror. I didn't crop it. Didn't blur anything. I wanted every detail visible. The charcoal suit pooled on the floor. The vintage Dior dress crumpled beside it. The panic on their faces. I typed a single sentence. Short. Clean. Devastating. The wedding is cancelled. Trent and Brittany can keep the bed. I hit send. I watched the progress bar inch across the screen. The image uploaded slowly. Agonizingly. I imagined the notification pinging on 20 phones across the city. I imagined my mother's face when she saw it. I imagined Brittany's Instagram perfect world imploding in real time. The bar reached 100%. Delivered. Done. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and put the car in drive. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The front door of the house burst open. Trent came sprinting out, still shirtless. Still in his boxers. His chest heaving. He waved his arms frantically. His mouth open. Shouting something I couldn't hear. He looked pathetic, desperate, like a man who had just realized he was about to lose everything. I didn't slow down. I accelerated onto the main road and left him there, standing in the middle of the street in his underwear. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? I made my choice in that moment. I chose me. Less than 2 minutes passed before my phone started vibrating violently. The screen lit up with my mother's name. Patricia. I answered through the car's Bluetooth, already knowing what was coming. Her voice exploded through the speakers, sharp and furious. Not a single note of concern for her daughter's shattered heart. Clara. What is wrong with you? She yelled. Why on earth would you send something so vulgar into a group chat that includes your Aunt Susan and Uncle George? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for our family? I kept my eyes on the road ahead, my voice flat. Mom, I just caught my fiancé sleeping with my sister in my house. And your first concern is Aunt Susan seeing a picture. You are acting completely unhinged. She snapped. You are making a public spectacle of a private matter. This is going to be the talk of the entire North Shore. Everyone at the golf club will know. You could have pulled Trent aside. You could have talked to your sister like a civilized adult. Instead, you throw a tantrum and embarrass all of us? I let her rant for another 30 seconds. Then tapped the button on my steering wheel to end the call. Silence filled the car. I felt the last thread of attachment to my family snap cleanly. They had made their choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. The phone buzzed against the passenger seat, the screen glowing with my mother's name, Patricia. I answered through the car's Bluetooth, my voice flat. Hello. Mom. Her voice exploded through the speakers, shrill and furious. Not a trace of concern. Clara. What is wrong with you? Why on earth would you send something so vulgar into a group chat that includes your Aunt, Susan, and Uncle George? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for our family? I kept my eyes fixed on the highway, the afternoon sun glinting off the hood. Mom, I just caught my fiancé sleeping with my sister in my house. Your first reaction is Aunt Susan's feelings. You are acting completely unhinged. She snapped. You could have pulled Trent aside, talked to your sister like a civilized adult. Instead, you throw a public tantrum and embarrass all of us? This will be the talk of the entire North Shore. Everyone at the golf club will know. She paused to take a breath. And I heard the clink of ice in a glass. She was drinking. At 3 p.m? You need to delete that message immediately. She continued, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper. Send another one saying your phone was hacked. Tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. We are not canceling this wedding. We have guests flying in from out of state. The floral arrangements alone cost $50,000. Your father will lose his mind. I let her words wash over me. In her world, appearances were everything. The truth was just an inconvenience. I'm not deleting anything. Mom? Clara. Listen to me. Her tone turned ice cold. You have always been jealous of your sister. You have always looked for ways to sabotage her happiness. Trent is a successful wealth manager. He's stressed. Men make mistakes when they are under pressure. But sending that photo that was a deliberate, vicious attempt to destroy your sister's reputation. A dry laugh escaped my lips. You're defending him. You're defending the man who was in my bed with Brittany 3 days before I was supposed to marry him. I am defending this family's standing. She hissed. Now do as I say. Delete the message and tell everyone it was a hack. We'll sort this out after the wedding. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The highway stretched ahead, empty and gray. I thought about the years of small betrayals, the constant favoritism, the way they always expected me to bend. This was just the largest, ugliest version of the same old story. The wedding is off. Mom, I said, my voice steady and cold. I am not marrying a man who sleeps with my own sister in my own house. And I am not covering for anyone. Clara. Do not you dare! I tapped the red button on the steering wheel. The call ended. Silence filled the car. Thick and absolute. I felt the last lingering thread of attachment to my family sever completely. They had made their choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. My phone rang again before I even reached the next intersection. The caller ID displayed my father's name. Richard? I let it ring 3 times, letting the tension build. Then answered with the same flat tone I'd used with my mother. Clara, he said, his voice sharp and commanding. Lacking any parental warmth? Your mother is practically hyperventilating in the kitchen. I imagine she is. Do you have any idea how many prominent investors are attending this wedding on Saturday? He demanded, his volume rising. Trent's partners are flying in. We have senators on the guest list. You just sent a photograph that will make this family a laughingstock. I kept my eyes on the road. The highway signs blurring past. Dad. Trent was sleeping with Brittany in my house. In my bed? 3 days before our wedding. He let out a long, heavy sigh. The kind he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. Listen to me. You're the logical one. Let's look at this practically. Trent is a highly visitable wealth manager. He thrives in social settings. Networking events. Gala dinners. Brittany is an influencer. She lives for the spotlight. If we're being completely honest, Trent fits Brittany's lifestyle better anyway. You hate those high society events? You prefer hiding behind spreadsheets. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. Are you justifying his infidelity because of country club dinner parties? I am looking at the big picture. Richard snapped back. And the big picture includes a $150,000 wedding venue that has been paid in full. The floral arrangements. The ice sculptures. The catering from that Michelin-starred chef. It's all non-refundable. We are not throwing away $150,000 because your feelings got hurt. I let his words settle into the silence of the car. He wasn't asking me to be understanding. He was telling me to surrender. That money was an investment in our image. He continued. You are going to sign the venue rights over to Brittany. We'll announce that the wedding is celebrating Brittany's engagement to Trent. It's unconventional. Yes. But people love a dramatic romance. Trent's investors will still have their party. Our country club friends will still have their open bar. And we save our social standing. He paused, letting the weight of his authority hang in the air. Then he delivered the final blow. You get to walk away quietly without making a scene. Don't be selfish and ruin this for your sister just because things didn't work out the way you planned. Don't be selfish. Those 2 words had followed me my entire life. Every time I needed support. Every time I asked for fairness. Every time I dared to demand something for myself. They were thrown at me like a weapon. Don't be selfish. Stay quiet. Make yourself smaller. Let Brittany have the spotlight. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? I did not scream. I did not argue. I simply tapped the red button on my steering wheel and ended the call. Then I turned off my phone completely. The screen went black. The car fell silent. I pulled off the highway at the next exit and drove until I found a cheap, nameless motel on the outskirts of the city. The kind that accepted cash and asked no questions. I paid for 3 nights. Took the metal key. And walked into a room that smelled of stale smoke and harsh cleaning chemicals. I dropped my purse onto the floral bedspread and sat at the rickety desk. Any normal bride would be sobbing on the floor, frantically calling her bridesmaids, mourning the shattered illusion of a picture-perfect future. I did not cry. My tears had dried up years ago. Instead, I reached into my leather bag and pulled out my work laptop. A high-powered machine loaded with auditing software, data extraction tools, encrypted networks. Trent thought I was just a boring corporate drone who crunched numbers for a paycheck. My parents thought I was a spineless pushover who would always bend to their demands. Brittany thought she had won the ultimate prize by stealing my wealthy fiancé. They were all wrong. I took a slow breath, cracked my knuckles, opened the laptop screen, and watched the bright blue light illuminate the dark. Dinj room. If they wanted to play games with my life, my money, and my professional future, I would gladly show them exactly how a forensic accountant handles a hostile family takeover. I drove aimlessly for an hour, the highway blurring into gray concrete and endless city lights. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to move, to put distance between me and the wreckage of my life. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a cheap, nameless motel on the outskirts of Chicago. The sign flickered. Half the letters burned out. This was the kind of place that accepted cash and asked no questions about why a woman in a tailored suit was checking in at noon on a Tuesday. I paid for 3 nights with crumpled bills from my wallet. The clerk barely looked up from his phone. He slid a metal key across the counter, and I walked to a room on the ground floor. The carpet stained and peeling. The door groaned open, and the smell hit me first. Stale cigarette smoke layered over industrial disinfectant. The kind that tries to mask rot but only makes it worse. I dropped my purse onto the floral bedspread, which had a suspicious yellow stain near the pillow. The window looked out onto the parking lot and a chain-link fence. I sat at the rickety desk. The wood chipped and warped. Any normal bride would be sobbing on the floor, frantically calling her bridesmaids, mourning the shattered illusion of her future. I did not cry. My tears had dried up years ago, somewhere between my 10th canceled birthday party and the moment I realized my parents would never love me the way I needed them to. Instead, I reached into my leather bag and pulled out my work laptop, a high-powered machine loaded with auditing software, data extraction tools, and encrypted networks. Trent thought I was just a boring corporate drone who crunched numbers for a steady paycheck. My parents thought I was a spineless pushover who would always bend to their demands. Brittany thought she had won the ultimate prize by stealing my wealthy fiancé. They were all wrong. I took a slow breath, cracked my knuckles, and opened the laptop screen. The bright blue light illuminated the dark room. I thought one word: hostile takeover. If they wanted to play games with my life, my money, and my professional future, I would show them exactly how a forensic accountant handles a family coup. The sun had barely breached the horizon when my phone buzzed with a sharp text from my mother: "Come to the house. Now. We need to discuss the arrangements." I had spent the entire night running preliminary background audits, my eyes burning. But I showered in the motel's lukewarm water, put on a fresh blazer, and drove to the family estate in the North Shore. Walking through the heavy oak front doors, I was hit by the familiar scent of lemon polish and fresh lilies. My mother always made sure the house smelled perfect for guests. I stepped into the expansive living room, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. The scene before me looked like a staged photograph for a luxury lifestyle magazine. Brittany and Trent sat close together on the plush white linen sofa, their fingers intertwined. Trent wore a casual but expensive cashmere sweater, looking entirely too relaxed for a man caught cheating 24 hours prior. Brittany rested her head on his shoulder, wearing a designer sundress and a delicate gold necklace, the same one I had paid for as her birthday gift last year. My father, Richard, stood by the grand stone fireplace, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon despite it being barely 10 inches the morning. My mother, Patricia, hovered behind the sofa like a protective guard dog, resting her hands on Brittany's shoulders. The sheer audacity of the tableau was staggering. I was the one who had been deeply betrayed. Yet the entire room was physically positioned to defend Brittany and Trent from my presence. I stood near the entryway, folding my arms across my chest, The silence stretched thick and heavy. No one offered an apology. No one looked ashamed. Instead, Trent gave me a look that mixed pity with bold arrogance. Squeezing my sister's hand. "Clara," my father finally said, breaking the tension. "We're glad you decided to be sensible and join us. Have a seat. We have a lot to discuss regarding Saturday." I remained standing. "I'm perfectly fine right here." Brittany let out a dramatic, trembling sigh and buried her face into Trent's chest. He stroked her hair, casting a protective glare in my direction. "Clara, you have to understand," she murmured. "We never meant for this to happen. It was an accident. We just couldn't help falling in love. You were always at the office, staring at those boring financial reports. Trent was lonely, and I was just trying to be a good friend." Trent nodded solemnly. "It's the truth. Clara, you're too obsessed with numbers and spreadsheets to make a man like me happy. I need a partner who understands my social world. Brittany makes me feel alive. You just make me feel like a liability on a balance sheet." Patricia stepped forward, nodding. "Trent is right. You lack the natural warmth required to thrive in our social circles. Brittany is simply better suited for a high-profile marriage. If you had paid more attention to your relationship instead of your career, perhaps Trent wouldn't have been forced to seek affection elsewhere." I listened to this coordinated psychological attack with utter fascination. The gaslighting was so intensely calculated, it was almost impressive. Have you ever had to sit in a room full of people who were rewriting reality to justify betraying you? All while pretending they were the victims, I held my silence. I let them talk, and I smiled inside. Because I already knew the numbers didn't lie. Richard cleared his throat and stepped forward. Placing a thick stack of legal documents onto the glass coffee table, the paper landed with a crisp slap against the polished wood. He pushed a sleek silver pen across the surface, sliding it toward me with the casual authority of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. "This is the contract transferring the rights of the country club wedding venue, the catering deposits, and the floral arrangements directly over to Brittany and Trent. Since you are the primary account holder on the bookings, the club requires your physical signature to authorize the transfer." I looked down at the documents, then up at my family. Their faces were tense with anticipation. Trent's jaw was set, his fingers drumming on Brittany's shoulder. Patricia's hands were clasped tightly, her knuckles white. Brittany's eyes were wide and wet, a practiced look of vulnerable hope. They fully expected a fight, a breakdown, a desperate plea for justice. Instead, a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I understood, in that exact moment, how utterly pointless fighting them would be. They were not going to hear my pain, acknowledge my loss, or apologize. They were going to bulldoze over me until I either broke or complied. But I had already chosen a third path. I was going to destroy them systematically, and I needed their complete complacency to make it work. So I picked up the pen. I held it for a fraction of a second, making sure they saw the smile on my face. Then I bent over the coffee table and signed my name on every single dotted line without hesitation. The scratch of the nib against the paper was the only sound in the room. I signed 3 times, once for the venue transfer, once for the catering, once for the floral contract. Then I set the pen down and straightened up. Meeting each of their eyes in turn, the relief in the room was immediate and sickening. Richard smirked, clapping Trent on the shoulder. "See, I told you she'd be reasonable." Patricia beamed at Brittany, her eyes glistening with fake tears of joy. Brittany let out a shaky breath and leaned into Trent's side, her diamond necklace catching the morning light. They genuinely thought they had won. They thought I had finally accepted my place as the discarded backup sister. I turned my back on their smug celebration and walked out the front door. My heels clicked on the marble foyer, then on the stone pathway, Then on the asphalt of the driveway, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had just signed over everything they wanted. And in doing so, I had bought myself exactly what I needed: time. Have you ever had to smile and nod while someone took everything you had built? Just so you could have the last word later. That is how I felt as I slid into my car and drove straight back to the motel. The same stale smell. The same peeling wallpaper. The same chipped laminate desk. I locked the deadbolt, pulled the flimsy curtains shut, and sat down in front of my laptop. I cracked my knuckles. I opened the encrypted system, and I began the forensic audit that would bury them all. I opened the joint banking portal, my fingers moving with the muscle memory of 1,000 audits. The screen glowed in the dim motel room as I bypassed the primary dashboard and pulled the raw transactional data directly into my proprietary auditing software. The program immediately began categorizing debits, credits, and wire transfers. Highlighting irregular patterns in bright red text, I watched the algorithm process the history of the account over the past 60 days. The results materialized, and a cold wave of realization washed over me. Trent had not just been unfaithful in our bed. He had been violently unfaithful with my finances. The balance, which should have sat comfortably at 6 figures to cover our upcoming property taxes and final vendor payments, was utterly decimated. He had not made a single deposit to replace the funds he supposedly borrowed for his broker's commission. Instead, he had executed a highly calculated series of withdrawals. The software highlighted 42 separate transactions, structured to fly under the radar, kept just below the reporting thresholds that would trigger an automatic alert from the bank. He moved funds in increments of $4. Nous là-dessus. Ling ling ling. Routing them through a digital payment processor to obscure the final destination. I ran a quick aggregate sum on the diverted funds. The total hit the bottom of my spreadsheet with devastating finality: $80. Ling ling ling. Trent had siphoned exactly $80. 000 from my hard-earned savings. I leaned back in the creaking motel chair, letting the number sink in. This was not a mistake or a temporary cash flow problem. This was a systematic, premeditated theft. He was a wealth manager. He knew exactly how to manipulate the system to avoid raising red flags with the fraud department. He assumed I was too busy picking out floral arrangements and tasting catering menus to ever notice the slow, systemic bleeding of our joint assets. He had treated my savings account like his own personal slush fund. The betrayal cut much deeper than the physical affair. Sleeping with my sister was an impulsive act of lust and ego. Stealing $80. 000 through dozens of structured transfers was a deliberate, malicious operation requiring weeks of active deception. He sat across from me at the dinner table, kissed me goodnight, and discussed our future children, all while systematically draining the safety net I had spent a decade building. Have you ever trusted someone with your savings only to find out they were draining it behind your back? That hollow feeling is what fueled my next move. I did not feel tears. I felt pure, unadulterated focus. I launched a secondary tracing protocol to follow the digital footprints Trent had tried to hide. The payment processor he used was secure but not invisible to someone with my specific skill set. I unraveled the dummy accounts he set up and followed the money trail directly to its endpoints. The first major chunk, approximately $55. Ling ling ling. Had been wired to a series of offshore servers located in the Caribbean and Malta. I cross-referenced the server IP addresses with international financial registries. They were high-stakes offshore sports betting and unregulated online gambling syndicates. Trent did not have a temporary cash flow problem. He had a massive, crippling gambling addiction. And he was feeding it with my money. The remaining $25, 000, followed a very different path. The trace led back domestically, landing in the merchant account of an exclusive boutique jeweler located right in the heart of downtown Chicago. I pulled the jeweler's public sales records and matched the transaction date to a specific purchase order. The receipt detailed a custom-crafted piece featuring a delicate gold chain and a rare teardrop diamond. My mind instantly flashed back to the family meeting in my parents' living room just hours ago. I pictured Brittany resting her head on Trent's cashmere sweater, looking up at me with those fake, tear-filled eyes. Resting against her collarbone was a delicate gold necklace with a teardrop diamond. I had originally thought it was a piece I bought her for her birthday last year. I was wrong. The necklace she was so proudly flaunting on her Instagram and wearing to my face was bought and paid for using the exact money Trent stole from my savings account. The golden child was literally wearing my stolen funds around her neck. A dark, terrifying clarity settled over me. I closed the banking portal and opened a new blank dossier on my desktop. This was just the beginning. I dove deeper into the transactional data, my fingers flying across the keyboard as the tracing protocol pulled up the digital breadcrumbs Trent had tried to bury. The first chunk, $55, 000, had been routed through a series of dummy accounts before landing on offshore servers located in the Caribbean and Malta. I cross-referenced the IP addresses with international financial registries and felt a cold, metallic taste settle on my tongue. These were high-stakes sports betting platforms and unregulated online gambling syndicates. Trent didn't have a temporary cash flow problem. He had a crippling gambling addiction. And he had been feeding it with my money, draining my savings, one structured withdrawal at a time to cover his losses. The second trail was shorter but more personal. The remaining $25, 000, had been wired to a merchant account belonging to an exclusive boutique jeweler in downtown Chicago. I pulled the purchase order, a custom-crafted gold chain with a rare teardrop diamond. The date matched exactly 2 weeks before the family meeting. My mind flashed back to that living room. Brittany resting her head on Trent's cashmere sweater. The delicate necklace catching the light as she looked up at me with those fake, tear-filled eyes. I had assumed it was the birthday gift I'd bought her last year. I was wrong. That necklace was bought with the money Trent stole from our joint account. My money, my savings, my decade of hard work. She had been wearing my stolen funds around her neck while my parents demanded I surrender my wedding venue. I sat back in the flimsy motel chair, the realization washing over me like ice water. Trent wasn't just a cheater. He was a gambler who had targeted me as his financial shield. And Brittany, the golden child, had eagerly accepted a piece of jewelry bought with stolen cash. She thought she'd won a wealthy executive. She'd actually won a bankrupt addict whose debt was about to become hers. I opened a new dossier on my desktop and began documenting every transaction, every IP address, every timestamp. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? Because I was done choosing their peace. I was about to show them exactly how a forensic accountant handles a hostile takeover. I sat back in the flimsy motel chair, the glow of the laptop screen casting long shadows across the peeling wallpaper. My mind was still processing the numbers. But the bigger picture was already forming, a picture far uglier than a simple affair. Trent hadn't just cheated on me with my sister. He had targeted me from the beginning. Calculated and cold, like a predator choosing its prey. I thought back to when we first met. He was charming, successful, always asking about my work. I'd told him about my job as a forensic accountant, about the stable income, the zero debt, the pristine credit score I'd built over a decade. He listened intently, asked questions that seemed intelligent. Now I saw the truth. He wasn't interested in me. He was auditing my financial viability. To secure the $1 million mortgage on the Evanston house, the bank required a co-borrower with an impeccable history. Trent's own credit was a mess I hadn't checked because I trusted him. But the numbers on his application would have screamed risk. He needed my name on the paperwork to hide his drowning debts. And once we married, he would have legal access to my future earnings, my bonuses, my entire financial life. He planned to use me as a shield, plugging the holes in his client accounts with my income while he fed his gambling addiction. Then there was Brittany, She thought she'd stolen a wealthy executive, a man of status and money. She saw the bespoke suits, the expensive dinners, the Instagram-worthy lifestyle. She didn't see the offshore betting accounts, the mounting losses, the desperate borrowings. She didn't realize that Trent was a bankrupt gambling addict clinging to a sinking ship. By stealing him, she hadn't won a prize. She had inherited a liability. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh out loud in the empty motel room. Two parasites had accidentally latched onto the exact same sinking vessel. Trent needed a rich, stable wife to save him from federal prison. Brittany needed a wealthy husband to fund her influencer fantasy. They thought they had broken my heart, but they had actually destroyed their own survival plans. By sleeping together, they had cut their own lifelines. I leaned forward, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The investigation was far from over. If Trent was desperate enough to steal $80, ling ling ling. I needed to know who else in my orbit he had infected and how deep the rot went. But already, I understood the core of his scheme. He didn't love me. He needed me. And now, he was about to learn that a forensic accountant is the worst person to cross. I cracked my knuckles and opened a new window on my laptop. If Trent had been quietly bleeding our joint account dry, I needed to check every financial entity he had access to. That included my grandfather's trust fund, a portfolio I had barely touched since inheriting it. The core index funds remained technically intact, but the overall liability column flashed a brilliant, blinding red. A massive lien had been attached to the primary account, a staggering $500. 000 collateral loan had been executed against my grandfather's trust just 3 weeks ago. My heart slammed against my ribs. I had absolutely not authorized a loan of any kind. I had not spoken to the wealth managers handling this specific portfolio in over 6 months, let alone requested a $500,000 liquid cash injection. I immediately pulled the execution documents from the digital archive, my eyes scanning the heavily formatted legal text. The PDF files loaded line by line. I scrolled past the boilerplate liability clauses straight to the final authorization page. There it was, stark and black against the white digital paper, my signature. I zoomed in on the high-resolution scan, examining the ink strokes with forensic precision. It was flawless. The specific loop of the C, the sharp angle of the A, the precise slant I used on official tax forms and bank documents. Anyone glancing at it would verify it as my authentic, legally binding handwriting. But I knew with absolute certainty that I had never held a pen to that particular piece of paper. The loan process required stringent dual authentication, a digital signature matched with a physical notarized document scanned directly into the banking system. I downloaded the complete verification packet. Someone had meticulously forged my signature to leverage $500,000 of my secured inheritance. The sheer audacity of the crime was breathtaking. A standard identity thief would try to drain a checking account or max out an unsecured credit card. Only someone intimately familiar with my financial architecture, my exact handwriting style, and the strict protocols of this specific trust fund could bypass the institutional security measures so seamlessly. I stared at the forged ink on the screen, my analytical mind breaking down the mechanics of the fraud. To execute a collateral loan of this magnitude against a locked trust, the perpetrator needed my social security number, my mother's maiden name, the original account routing numbers, and a heavily manipulated notary public. The list of suspects capable of orchestrating this exact combination of requirements was incredibly short. I ran an immediate trace on the IP address used to originate the digital loan request. The geolocation software processed the data and pinpointed a residential broadband network located in the North Shore. I recognized the specific service provider and the unique network identification tag. It was the exact router located in my father's private home office. Next, I examined the digital notary stamp pressed at the bottom of the PDF document. The name registered to the seal was an administrative assistant who worked directly at Richard's corporate firm. The pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. Patricia and Richard had actively conspired to forge my signature. My own parents had committed massive federal identity theft to steal $500,000 from my grandfather's trust. They had bypassed my security to secure a massive loan I would eventually be liable to repay, all while smiling in my face and demanding I surrender my wedding venue to my cheating sister. Have you ever discovered that the people who raised you were capable of something like this? The ultimate betrayal was no longer just about infidelity. It was a highly organized criminal conspiracy executed by the very people who were supposed to protect me. And I was going to burn their entire fake empire to the ground. I leaned back in the chair and opened a new tracing window, pulling the wire transfer receipts attached to the loan origination file. The bank had divided the payout into 2 distinct electronic transfers. Per Richard's specific instructions, I copied the routing numbers and ran them through the financial clearinghouse database. The first transfer was for exactly $200. Ling ling ling. I watched the tracking software map the digital journey. It bypassed my parents' personal accounts entirely and landed directly in a corporate holding account registered to an LLC. I pulled the state business registry for the entity. The registered managing director was Trent. I dug into the LLC's operational ledger. It was a complete shell company bleeding cash from multiple angles, heavily leveraged, clearly set up to catch the overflow from his failing wealth management portfolios. The pieces clicked together with sickening precision. Trent was deeply in debt, drowning in his own Ponzi scheme. And Richard knew it. My father, desperate to maintain the illusion of a high society wedding and secure a glamorous wealth manager son-in-law for his golden child, had essentially bribed Trent. He used my stolen inheritance to buy Trent's loyalty, plugging the holes in his sinking ship to ensure he stayed with Brittany and kept the country club facade intact. It was a massive illegal payoff disguised as a corporate investment. Have you ever had your trust violated so completely that you realized the people you loved were nothing more than criminals wearing masks? I paused. Letting the weight of that question settle in my chest, I shifted my focus to the second wire transfer, the remaining $300. 000 followed a much more arrogant path. It dropped into a joint checking account controlled by Patricia and Brittany. The transaction log for this account read like a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. Within 48 hours of the funds clearing, a massive wire of $140. 000 was sent to a luxury European auto dealership in downtown Chicago. I opened a new browser tab and navigated directly to Brittany's Instagram page. Her most recent post, uploaded just last week, featured her posing provocatively against the hood of a brand new custom-ordered Porsche. The caption read, "Hard work pays off." So blessed for this new chapter. The irony was utterly repulsive. She wasn't manifesting success. She was driving my stolen trust fund. The rest of the $300, 000, had been rapidly draining away on a daily basis. First-class flights to Dubai. 15美元. 000 shopping sprees at Paris boutiques. Monthly retainer fees for high-end public relations agencies that managed her influencer brand. Every single aspect of her glamorous online persona. The lifestyle she constantly rubbed in my face. I was entirely funded by the money my grandfather had explicitly set aside for my future. They had robbed my safety net to purchase a fleeting digital illusion of grandeur. My mother had actively facilitated the theft to ensure her favorite daughter never had to experience the indignity of actually earning a living. This was no longer a simple matter of family drama or a broken engagement. The parameters had shifted from domestic betrayal to high-level federal criminality. I opened a new document on my desktop and began compiling a precise chronological legal index of their actions. Forging my signature on a collateral loan document constituted first-degree identity theft. Wire transferring the fraudulently obtained funds across state lines to offshore gambling accounts and shell companies constituted multiple counts of federal wire fraud. Falsifying the digital notary stamp was a severe state felony. I had the evidence. Now I needed the executioner. I opened a new document on my encrypted desktop and began building the formal legal dossier. This wasn't just a collection of screenshots and angry notes. This was a weaponized chronological index designed to survive any defense attorney's cross-examination. I labeled the first section, First-Degree Identity Theft, and attached the forged signature scan with my own genuine signature overlaid for comparison. The loop of the C, the angle of the A, the precise slant, identical. I added the IP address logs from my father's home office router, timestamped to the exact minute the digital loan request was submitted. The metadata alone would convict him. Next, I opened a new tab, Federal Wire Fraud, multiple counts. I listed every interstate transfer, starting with the $200. 0, 0, 0, routed to Trent's Shell Company in Nevada. Then the $300, 000, that landed in Patricia and Brittany's joint account. I mapped each wire to its originating bank and destination account, noting the crossing of state lines. The law is clear. Moving stolen funds across state borders via electronic transfer is a federal felony, punishable by up to 20 years per count. I had at least 8 separate wire transactions documented. Then I added falsifying a notary stamp, state felony. I pulled the digital seal from the loan document and compared it to the legitimate stamp on file with the Illinois Secretary of State. The differences were subtle but undeniable, a slight misalignment in the border, a different font weight on the expiration date. The administrative assistant who worked for Richard had either been coerced or bribed. Either way, she was now an accomplice. I saved the file, then ran a metadata extraction tool on every PDF and image I'd collected. The tool pulled creation dates, author names, device fingerprints, and GPS coordinates from the photos I'd taken. The camera on my phone had embedded the precise location of the bedroom in Evanston. The loan documents carried Richard's corporate computer signature. Every single piece of evidence was timestamped, geotagged, and forensically sound. By the time I closed the laptop, the dossier was 90 pages of undeniable truth. I leaned back in the creaking motel chair and stared at the peeling ceiling. This wasn't revenge. This was a surgical strike. And I had the scalpel. Have you ever had to build a case against someone you once loved? That moment when the evidence forces you to see them for who they really are? No sentiment. No excuses, just facts. That's when you know you're ready to walk away for good. I slid the motel room key into my pocket, the thick manila folder tucked under my arm. I had one person who could turn my 9-page dossier into a legal execution. My brother David's husband, Jamal, was a corporate litigation partner at one of the most feared firms in Chicago. He was brilliant, aggressive, and he had spent the last 7 years swallowing my parents' subtle racism with silent dignity, introducing him as David's roommate, excluding him from family portraits, questioning affirmative action at dinner. He saw them for what they were, and he had the legal teeth to grind them into dust. I called him from the payphone at the motel's front desk. "Not my cell," he answered on the second ring. Voice crisp. "Clara David told me about the wedding. I'm so sorry. I don't need sympathy. Jamal, I need your brain. Off the record. Can you meet me?" He didn't hesitate. The Blue Door Coffee on Madison. 1 hour. I drove through the gray Chicago traffic, parked 3 blocks away, and walked into a narrow cafe that smelled of roasted beans and old wood. Jamal was already there, sitting at a corner table facing the door, a black coffee untouched. He wore a charcoal suit, his tie loose. I sat down, slid the manila folder across the scarred table, and said, "Trent is a fraud. My parents are federal criminals." He opened the folder without a word. For 20 minutes he read the forged signature scans, The IP logs from my father's office. The offshore gambling transfers. The $300. 000 that bought Brittany's Porsche. His jaw tightened when he saw the notary stamp from his own firm's administrative assistant. When he finished, he closed the folder and placed his hands flat on top. He looked up at me, his dark eyes sharp and dangerous. A slow smile spread across his face, and he leaned forward, voice dropping to a low, level tone. Clara, this is not a family dispute. This is a syndicate of wire fraud, identity theft, and SEC violations. Your fiancé is looking at a decade in federal prison, and your parents just handed us the matches to burn their country club reputation to ashes. He tapped the folder. So, before I start drafting subpoenas, I need to know exactly how far you're willing to take this. Do you want them to grovel? Or do you want them in a cage? I didn't blink. Both. He extended his hand. I shook it. We were ready to detonate. Jamal slid the manila folder into his briefcase and pulled out his own encrypted laptop. He cracked his knuckles. The same deliberate motion I used before a deep audit. All right, he said, his voice low and steady. We hit them from 2 angles simultaneously. First, Trent. He's not just a cheater, he's a federal liability. He opened a blank document and began typing. I'm drafting a whistleblower report to the SEC. Every single detail you trace the offshore gambling accounts. The client funds he commingled. The structured withdrawals. The SEC has been hunting for a case like this in Chicago. They'll jump on it. He looked up. I'm scheduling digital submission for Friday night. That gives the agents the entire weekend to review the evidence. By Monday morning, they'll have a federal investigation underway. Trent won't even know it's coming until the agents knock on his door. I nodded. And my parents. That's the second prong. He opened a separate legal template. Emergency ex parte motions. I'm filing them first thing Wednesday morning with a federal judge. These motions will freeze your personal accounts and lock down the remaining principal of your grandfather's trust fund. Without a hearing, without notice to your parents, the bank will reject any further withdrawal attempts before your mother even finishes her morning coffee. He typed rapidly. Simultaneously, I'm drafting a formal criminal referral for identity theft and wire fraud against Richard and Patricia. I'll attach the IP logs from your father's home office and the metadata from the forged notary stamp. We'll submit it directly to the U.S. Attorney's office bypass all local jurisdictions. Your parents' country club connections won't save them from federal indictments. He closed the laptop and leaned back. This way. The SEC handles Trent. The federal prosecutor handles your parents. And your assets are secured before anyone can touch another dime. They'll spend the next 3 days drinking champagne, thinking they've won. By Monday, the cage doors will slam shut. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Perfect timing. He smiled. I learned from the best. Now let's go ruin a wedding. The rehearsal dinner took place at the country club that Friday night. The same club where my father had closed a dozen business deals over 18-hole rounds. I wore the muted blue bridesmaid dress my mother had chosen, the fabric clinging in all the wrong places, the color washing me out. I didn't care. I was a shadow. And shadows observe everything. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and imported white roses. 300 of Chicago's elite filled the tables. Investors, politicians, socialite. My father stood at the podium, gripping the microphone like a CEO announcing a merger. When Trent first came into our lives, he boomed. I knew immediately he was the son I always wanted. He paused, letting the words land. My brother David shifted uncomfortably beside Jamal, his jaw tight. Richard had just publicly erased his own son. The crowd applauded. Trent raised his glass, beaming, while Brittany kissed his cheek. I sat at a corner table, sipping sparkling water, watching the performance of false loyalty. Halfway through the entree course, Jamal appeared beside me, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, pretending to be a distant cousin. He leaned in as if to compliment my dress, but his hand brushed mine beneath the tablecloth. He pressed two objects into my palm, a small red velvet box, heavy and solid, and a sleek metal USB drive. His whisper was barely audible over the string quartet. The SEC agents are fully briefed. They reviewed the whistleblower report this afternoon. By tomorrow night, the arrest warrants will be ready. The hotel AV technician is ours. Just plug this in when you give your speech. I curled my fingers around the drive, the cold metal grounding me. And my parents? The federal prosecutor is drafting the indictment as we speak. Monday morning. They'll have a reservation in a cell. You just need to hold the microphone. I slipped both items into the hidden pocket of my blazer. The trap was set. The wedding morning broke clear and cold. A perfect November sky over the Chicago skyline. I arrived at the 5-star hotel 2 hours before the ceremony, stepping into the grand ballroom while the event coordinators scrambled with last-minute arrangements. The room was a monument to stolen wealth. Massive cascades of imported orchids dripped from the ceiling, their fragrance thick and cloying $50,000 of my grandfather's trust fund. Now wilting on stems, 2 intricately carved ice sculptures flanked a 6-tier champagne tower, the bubbles catching the light of crystal chandeliers. I calculated the cost of every detail: the seafood station, the monogrammed napkins, the gold-leafed menu cards. Every single element was a wire transfer from my stolen inheritance. I stood near the entrance, watching the caterers arrange caviar and lobster. When my mother intercepted me, she stepped out from behind a pillar in a custom-tailored silver gown, her neck heavy with pearls. She grabbed my arm and pulled me into an alcove by the elevators, her grip tight, her perfume suffocating. I am so proud of you for finally accepting your place. Clara, you were never meant for a man like Trent anyway. He needs a woman who shines. Brittany is giving him the life he deserves. I looked into her eyes, seeing nothing but cold calculation. You're right, Mom, I said, my voice flat. They deserve each other, and they're going to get exactly what they've earned today. She smiled, mistaking my calm for surrender, and walked away. Have you ever had to stand in the middle of someone else's fairy tale, knowing you held the only truth in the room? I did, and in 2 hours, I was going to burn it all down. The ceremony began with the first chords of the string quartet, a classical arrangement that cost more per minute than most people earn in a day. I stood at the front of the grand hall, gripping a bouquet of white roses, my face a mask of polite detachment. The heavy oak doors swung open, and Brittany appeared in a $15 and some 000 designer gown, cascading silk, hand-do embroidered lace, a train that swept the petalose-strewn aisle like a queen's robe. She floated toward the altar, her eyes locked on Trent, her smile radiant with stolen victory. Trent stood under the flower-arched canopy, beaming. The officiant spoke about trust, loyalty, and building a life on honesty. The hypocrisy was suffocating. I watched them exchange vows, each word a lie wrapped in silk. Brittany promised to stand by him through wealth and hardship. Trent promised to protect and cherish her. They slid platinum rings onto each other's fingers, and the crowd erupted in applause. Then came the private signing room. The wedding planner ushered us into a small mahogany-paneled chamber adjacent to the ballroom. A single polished table held the state marriage license. Trent stepped forward first, picked up the pen, and signed his name with a flourish. He handed the pen to Brittany, who smiled a bright, triumphant smile and signed her name beside his. The ink dried, binding them legally. I stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching the trap snap shut. Under federal law, they were now one financial entity. Every dollar of Trent's federal debt, every restitution order from the SEC, every gambling loss became hers. The golden child had just inherited a mountain of liability she couldn't see. I smiled. The USB drive in my pocket felt heavier than lead. I stepped up to the microphone. The weight of the USB drive cold against my palm. The room fell into a silence so deep I could hear the chandelier crystals humming. I looked out at the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, at the investors who had trusted Trent with their life savings, at the socialites who had whispered about me all week. Then I looked directly at the head table, where Brittany was leaning forward with that victorious smirk. Waiting for me to crumble, I leaned into the mic. Until 72 hours ago, I was Trent's fiancé. The words landed like a grenade. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Patricia's hand flew to her throat. Richard stiffened. Brittany's smirk faltered. I didn't pause. Tonight, I want to give my sister a gift that truly reflects what she and Trent have given me. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the sleek metal drive, and held it up so the chandelier light caught the surface. Then I walked to the AV table, plugged it in, and tapped the keyboard. The massive projector screen above the head table flickered to life. For a split second, it glowed white, then the high-resolution image appeared. 15 feet tall. Burning into the eyes of every single guest. There they were, Trent. Naked. Scrambling for the duvet. And Brittany. Frozen mid-gasp. Tangled in my sheets. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then a champagne flute shattered on the marble floor. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect because I chose myself? The chaos erupted, chairs scraping. Investors shouting. My mother shrieking, but I just stood there, watching the love of my sister's life framed in pixels above her head. The screen didn't linger on their naked shame. The projector software advanced automatically, cutting to the second slide before anyone could process the first. The bedroom photo vanished, replaced by a clinical collage of banking statements, wire transfer logs, and offshore gambling ledgers. I had designed it to look exactly like a forensic accounting exhibit because that's what it was. The top left quadrant showed the $80,000 theft from our joint account. Each structured withdrawal highlighted in red. Arrows traced the money from my savings to Trent's dummy accounts. Then to Caribbean betting servers. Next to it, a summary of the Ponzi scheme client funds he had commingled. Missing portfolios. Forged performance reports. The bottom third of the screen was dominated by a bold red banner that read SEC investigation pending. The letters were 200, point font. Impossible to miss. For a moment, the room went dead silent. The investors stopped shouting. The waiters froze. Every eye locked onto the numbers that spelled Trent's complete professional destruction. Then I tapped the keyboard again and the audio file began to play. My mother's voice, sharp and arrogant, filled the ballroom through the surround sound system. Are you sure the notary stamp cleared? Followed by Brittany's giggle. Yes. Mom? The $500,000 loan is approved. I'm ordering the Porsche tomorrow. Then Patricia's final line. Dripping with pride, I told you she'd never check the trust. The laughter that followed theirs. Recorded. Mocking echoed off the crystal chandeliers. The ballroom erupted. Not with whispers. With screams. With the sound of chairs overturning and glass shattering as Trent's clients lunged for him, Jamal's hand moved with the precision of a surgeon. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. The crisp white paper, catching the dim light of the panicked ballroom. Without a word, he stepped directly into Richard's path, cutting off my father's desperate lunge toward the stage. The heavy stack of federal court summons slapped against Richard's chest with a sharp, authoritative crack. Richard staggered backward, his hands flying up to catch the papers before they slid to the marble floor. His eyes widened as he recognized the bold federal insignia stamped across the top: Federal Court Summons for Wire Fraud and Identity Theft. Jamal announced, his voice cutting through the surrounding chaos like a blade. You and Patricia are ordered to appear before a federal magistrate Monday morning. The bank foreclosure on your estate is already processing. The asset freeze on Clara's trust fund is absolute. You have zero access to her money. You have zero access to your own accounts. You are finished. While Richard stood paralyzed, clutching the summons, I turned and walked toward the head table. Brittany was still on her knees, her designer gown shredded, her face streaked with mascara. She looked up at me, shaking. As I reached into the red velvet box and pulled out the official foreclosure notices, I let them drop onto her gold-leaf dinner plate, the paper landing with a dull thud against the wet tablecloth. You wanted the spotlight so badly. Brittany, I said, my voice steady and cold. Now you have it. Everyone in this room knows exactly what you are. You are married to a convicted fraudster. And you are bankrupt. Your Porsche is seized. Your wardrobe is gone. Your influencer career is dead. You have nothing. She let out a wail. But I didn't wait to hear it. I turned my back on the wreckage, stepped past the overturned chairs and shattered glass, and walked straight down the center aisle. Jamal and David fell into step beside me, their shoulders squared, clearing a path through the stunned guests. The heavy oak doors swung open ahead of us, and I stepped out of the ballroom without looking back. The chaos faded behind me, replaced by the cool night air and the absolute silence of justice served. 1 month later, I sat behind a massive mahogany desk in my new corner office on the 40th floor of our downtown headquarters. My promotion from senior forensic accountant to regional director of corporate investigations came with a window that overlooked Lake Michigan, morning sunlight glinting off the water. My personal bank accounts were secured. My grandfather's trust fund was locked under my exclusive control with enhanced biometric authentication. The air in my office smelled like fresh espresso and absolute victory. Jamal called with the final tally. Trent tried to flee to Mexico City on a one-way first-class ticket. The FBI caught him at O'Hare, handcuffed him to a metal bench, and seized a duffel bag stuffed with stolen cash. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire, fraud, and embezzlement. The judge gave him 10 years in federal prison. His license to manage wealth is permanently revoked. He'll be nearly 50 when he gets out, owing millions in restitution. Brittany's Instagram account was permanently suspended after being mass reported. Her assets were seized: the Porsche, the designer wardrobe, every gift Trent ever gave her. She now works 50 hours a week as a receptionist in a strip mall real estate office. Every paycheck is garnished by the federal government to pay back Trent's defrauded investors. She is broke, exiled from her social circles, and permanently trapped under a mountain of federal debt. My parents lost their North Shore mansion to foreclosure. The bank seized it Monday morning. They are living in a cheap motel off the interstate, waiting for their federal trial with public defenders. Their country club friends have cut all ties. The women who once drank my mother's imported wine now cross the street to avoid her. I pressed the red button on my phone when Patricia called from a burner, begging me to drop the charges. I said, "I don't know anyone by that name," and blocked the number. I leaned back in my leather chair and watched the city stretch out beneath me. Cutting toxic bloodlines does not leave you isolated. It removes the rot and makes room for real peace. I am no longer the forgotten scapegoat. I am the architect of my own future. And I will never let anyone compromise my balance sheet again. Share your story in the comments below if you've ever had to make the hard choice to protect your peace. Hit like and subscribe for more stories of ultimate justice. Remember, Your peace is your most valuable asset. Never let anyone steal it from you.